right, well, we are here today gathered to talk about the book All We Can Save, Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis, which is an anthology focusing on the voices of prominent women working in the climate movement. So we are super excited to have this unique focus today. And to delve into this really important topic that's just becoming increasingly more important, even as we're all at home. So with that being said, I will start I will click over, if I can, to our next slide and just briefly introduce who we are. So we are here today as a coalition of 100% Iowa, which is a grassroots project of the Iowa Environmental Council that advocates for 100% clean energy generation. So this project started earlier this year at the very beginning, and we have since shifted some of our organizing efforts to digital. Which has been really unique, but it's been a really good experience to broaden our reach and to talk with Iowans from across the state. We, as I had mentioned, are a part of the Iowa Environmental Council, which is the state's largest and most comprehensive environmental coalition here in Iowa. The council has two major focuses, both clean energy and clean water, and we work at the legislative level to influence policy change here at the state with a mission to make Iowa a better place to live, work, and enjoy. So as you can probably see on the screen, we are a small but mighty group. So today it is the four of us. We have Jordan Oster, who is our team lead. He is the advocacy and outreach coordinator at IEC. We have myself. My name is Kristen Weaverling, and I am the energy outreach coordinator here at Iowa, or at the Iowa Environmental Council, but as well as the 100% Iowa project. Then we have Paige Penningroth, who is a clean energy field organizer for our 100% Iowa project, as well as Rayhan Rashidi, who is also a clean energy field organizer. So you'll get to be hearing a little bit from all of us today. We're going to focus on 4 chapters of the book, and then we'll dive into a conversation about the book as a whole towards the end, if time allows. But each of us will be covering an individual chapter today. So a quick note about the event format. Obviously, we're going to have attendees off camera and muted by default, but we really want today to be a conversation and an open discussion. So if you would like to speak, simply raise your hand like Gail did at the beginning of this using the raised hand tool. And we've got someone monitoring that, so we'll make sure you get unmuted and can chime in. So you don't need to wait till the end of our conversation by any means. If you have something you want to contribute to the conversation, go right ahead and just raise your hand. Another way to ask a question or voice an opinion would be to use the Q&A tool that we have here. So if you're in the middle of lunch and you're not wanting to speak at the moment, feel free to use that, and we'll address those questions on a first come, first served basis. So that being said, I will go ahead and get started and introduce our book. I think a lot of people were excited for today's book just because of the unique focus on women and their voices and their work and contributions in this movement. So All We Can Save is a collection of essays, some poetry and some illustrations, all speaking to this issue. And we're really excited to dive in and explore some energy-focused chapters of the book. So to get started, I am going to turn it over to Jordan Oster so he can give a brief overview of the book and the authors.
Great, thank you, Kristen. The two authors and editors of the book, Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson Some of you may have been to our Bright Ideas virtual event that took place in October. Dr. Johnson was the keynote speaker at this event and really left us motivated and educated. She is from Brooklyn, New York, and works with the Urban Ocean Lab. A lot of her work is around climate change and oceans, and how oceans can be a solution to mitigating the climate crisis. She's definitely a rising voice in the climate change movement. We're excited that she spent a little bit of time with us virtually in Iowa just back in October. Her co-editor is Katharine Wilkinson. She's an author, writer, teacher. She started the Drawdown Project that talks about the impacts of climate change and our energy systems. We'll jump to the next slide and describe a little bit of the first chapter. This is Begin, which just gives some footing to what the rest of the book entails. The book starts with a short story about Eunice Newton Foote, and it's probably not a name that too many people are familiar with, but she was the author of the first published work about atmospheric warming of CO2. Wilkinson and Dr. Johnson dubbed her the first climate feminist. She was a signer of the Seneca Falls Declaration. So she worked hard for women's right to vote and suffrage, but also she outpaced male scientists by a number of years and published work about the impacts of climate. This book really is a way to highlight missing voices in the climate conversation. The editors say that women are often missing from the proverbial table. There's not always a seat for those voices. And what this book does through 50 plus different chapters and authors is lift up a mosaic of voices. As Kristen alluded to, this includes essays, poetry, hard science. It takes all types of voices to make up this movement and what needs to come next. I think a big takeaway from this opening chapter is we can't save what is gone, referring to lost plants and animals or Arctic ice, but it's too soon to give up on the rest. And that's the motivation for the title of this book, All We Can Save. It's about what we can still save. And through a lot of diverse reflections, we get a better picture of how we might do so. I'll just give a quick run through on the next slide of the different chapters or different sections of the book. They divided into 8 different sections: root, advocate, reframe, reshape, persist, feel, nourish, and rise. So each of these different sections comprise of 5 to 6 different chapters that reflect different parts of the climate change movement and what needs to be done within the climate change movement as well. We're really excited to share with you just 4 different chapters here today with the 100% team. We'll zoom in a little bit closer, and we have a good sampling amongst these different sections in the chapters we'll present to you today. I'd like to turn it over now to Rayhan Rashidi. She's going to be presenting on the chapter Beyond Coal.
All right, thank you so much, Jordan. 1 second. Okay. Yeah, I am happy to be here today to talk about the chapter Beyond Coal, which is under the Advocate subchapter that Jordan Oster just mentioned. And I want to introduce a little bit about the author. So the author of Beyond Coal is Marianne Hitt, who is the National Director of Campaigns at Sierra Club, and also the former director of the Beyond Coal campaign of Sierra Club. And she is born and raised in West Virginia, and her family still lives in West Virginia. And yeah, she also has a podcast called No Place Like Home, and feel free to learn more about her, and we will talk a little bit about the chapter. So for those who have read this chapter, we will kind of, I will kind of summarize how, you know, Marianne had talked about the transition from coal to clean energy, and then we can talk about some of the discussion questions regarding the chapter, and also kind of tie into Iowa, so we can have a little bit more local or statewide understanding. So she touched a lot on the lessons that she learned while leading the Beyond Coal movement. So she highlighted 10 important lessons, and I feel like those are very important ones to kind of learn as we advocate for this clean energy transition. And the very important ones is how she highlighted that the role of markets, market prices, and also policy are not the only things that is important when we want to talk about the transition beyond coal. Advocacy, which is you know, kind of bringing communities together and trying to learn smart and strategic ways to kind of come together in achieving a goal is very important. So advocacy plays an important role in terms of transitioning beyond coal. And another important role, another important point that she lays out is that how the transition from coal has to be an equitable and just shift. So we can't leave people behind, and the state and local leadership and also federal leadership really play an important role when it comes to transitioning from coal. That means supporting workers and their families and their communities, while also providing enough trainings and diversifying the economies when it comes to you know, moving towards clean energy. So that is really important when it comes to thinking about the communities that are affected, especially people who are come from marginalized or vulnerable communities, because their livelihoods are at stake when, you know, we want to think about all these systemic transitions that are important. So yeah, I think those are the main takeaways from this chapter, and we can go ahead and look at these discussion questions that the panelists have laid out. And I'll go ahead and say out the first question, which is, what are other sectors in Iowa besides the power sector that play an important role in combating greenhouse gas emissions? So yeah, feel free for any panelists to chime in, or attendees, you can, like what Kristen mentioned, can go ahead and raise your hand if you want to chime in.
Well, I can take a stab at this. Just real quick, I'm really passionate personally about the opportunity that's been presented in electrifying our transportation. I think there's just a massive opportunity for us to reduce our emissions that way. And I'm personally really excited to see that transition happen here in Iowa. I think we're lagging a little bit behind some other states, which have more robust charging infrastructure. They have higher adoption of electric vehicles, and I am really excited to contribute towards that advancement here in our state, because I just think it presents such a massive opportunity. And obviously, you know, being in Iowa, I think there's an opportunity for combating emissions in our agricultural sector, which is challenging for many reasons, but I feel like those are two big opportunities for us. It looks like we have some hands up. So I think I saw Kay's hand first, and I will go ahead and let her speak.
I was going to say agriculture for sure. I think that's a big component, big emissions that we really have to address. We need to really look at regenerative farming. And I'm encouraged by what I see, but people like Matt, what's his, in Iowa Power and Light, the Interfaith Iowa Power and Light. I'm encouraged by what I see there. We need a lot more interest in regenerative farming, but because that's a huge area of sequestration of carbon possibility.
Yeah, absolutely, Kay. I'm similarly inspired by what I've seen. I think there are more and more of those conversations happening in the farming community. I think we just need to, find a way to help people financially take on those projects. And I'm excited to see where our state can and will go on that front. I see Ryan Meyer's hand up, and I'm going to go ahead and let Ryan talk.
Yeah, Kristen, I sort of wanted your take on this, thinking about electrifying the transportation grid. Maybe a hard, solid answer for this is difficult, but thinking about the agricultural and sort of the rural backbone of Iowa's economy, do you think that plays into making electrifying the transportation grid more difficult? Because I think of Iowa and like Des Moines, a relatively sprawling city, and the influence that rural agriculture has on the culture and economy of Iowa, that to me that seems like it kind of contributes to a difficulty in electrifying the transportation grid. I was wondering what your take on that was.
Yeah, so I have a couple of observations. I think there is a challenge because the hindrance to adoption at this point is range anxiety. And I think in rural communities where land is more spread out, I think that range anxiety is just only heightened. That being said, range is less of a concern as this technology advances and moves forward. So I think it's about education. It's about getting out there and helping those communities understand, rumors they might have heard about the cons of EVs are maybe no longer the case. And then the second observation I wanted to share also was just that I think a lot of farmers are taking on solar. So a lot of farmers are out there right now and they're incorporating solar operations on site, and they're tapping into the power of that. So that's a really affordable way for them to step in to EV adoption, and they're well positioned to save a lot of money and to have really attractive paybacks just because of that. So I think that's something we should keep in mind as we're looking to educate those communities. Does anyone else have a take on that or anything to add? All right, well, we can move on to the next question then. Go ahead, Rehan.
Yeah. For the sake of time, we will move on to the second question, which is, what do you think is an effective way in ensuring a just transition from coal?
Maybe I'll jump in here, Rehan. I think that is an important question. It's something that the author addresses as well. You mentioned that she is from the state of West Virginia, which we all know has a long history in coal production. And, she wants to make sure these communities aren't left behind when we leave coal behind. And, I think, something we need to focus on, and you've seen other states doing this as well, is, job retraining. Is there other ways to boost these communities? We also know that renewables are a fast growing employer as well. I just answered a question in the Q&A. We have nationwide renewable energy employs 3 times more people than fossil fuels do nationwide. Wind and solar installers are amongst the fastest growing jobs in the country. And renewable jobs really aren't terribly different than fossil fuel jobs. You know, they're technical, they use tools, you solve problems. And, you know, I think that we need to find a way to get people in new opportunities, but also knowing that the transition away from burning coal is also something that lifts everybody economically as well. Less health problems, you know, less public health costs. You know, it's for the better, but it's always got to be at the forefront that, you know, leaving this technology is not going to hinder people. How can we, you know, use this transition to help people in this new energy economy?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jordan. I know I'm thinking of recent news as it relates to Alliance announcement to close its Lansing coal facility. And I'm thinking about some of the ways that they were trying to address the economic impacts of that. So part of that announcement included their plan to offer those employees job training. And I think they wound up only losing a small number of jobs at the end of the day from that, because they were trying to provide alternatives so that those folks had opportunities to work in clean energy. So I think we need to keep those folks at the forefront of our mind just to ensure we have a just transition.
I agree with both your points, Kristen and Jordan. It's really important to think about, like, you know, supporting these communities and their families, and also, you know, providing the trainings and diversifying the economies in the said community. Okay, we will move on to the last question. What are your thoughts on fracked gas being a substitute for coal? And keep in mind the externalities or hidden costs that the author notes in the chapter. And I also wanted to remind the attendees that you can raise your hand if you want to chime in with any thoughts or ideas you have.
Yeah, so we have a hand up, so I'm going to give Franklin the opportunity to talk before we move on. All right, Franklin, if you unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi.
I had multiple microphones to unmute. Hi, thank you for the opportunity. I guess I see that there's better opportunities for bridging fuels away from coal, and the number one on my list, way ahead of fracking, is nuclear power. And I was struck in the book that the first time I saw the word nuclear in the entire book was 340 pages into it. And I think that if we chose to, as a country, from an industrial or energy policy point of view, we could probably get rid of every coal plant in the country with maybe 50 or so new nuclear power plants. And that energy, once the plants are built, is so cheap that you could also take some of the revenue from it and funnel it, write it back into the coal communities, recognizing that there'll be other communities that benefit from having nuclear plants in their community or from the mining associated with that. It's very cheap, it's very safe. Well, it can be very cheap. And it already accounts for about 20% of our base load, I believe, with coal having a comparable amount, although somebody in the council probably has better stats. So I'm just curious where that fits into the picture in the minds of some of the panelists. Thank you.
Well, maybe I'll jump in. I think, Franklin, the chapter you're referring to is actually the chapter I'll be talking about later as well. The author there, Leah Stokes, advocates for nuclear running as long as possible, the current plants that are open. I'm not sure if she addresses an expansion of that. It's something that's a big, complex issue. Obviously, nuclear power. From the emissions-free side, I think that's something that certainly is a benefit. I also think that there are some other questions that go with that in terms of cost and development of these sources, which have been a big question, obviously. And then ramifications too from long-term storage of waste products that could span eons. But I think that if you look at our breakdown of emissions-free power nationwide, nuclear is still a large portion of what's being used. The authors of this book, as you note, mostly do address wind, solar efficiency building practices as the answer, but it's just one of those subjects that is a little bit tricky.
Yeah, thanks for addressing that, Jordan. I know we get a lot of questions about nuclear, and while it does have some pros to it, it is rather costly to build up those facilities. And right now we're at a point where renewables are the most cost-effective solution. The Duane Arnold plant in outside of Cedar Rapids was recently it recently announced that it was going to retire earlier than it had anticipated initially, and that was just because of the economics behind it. I think they were projected to save something like $63 million from an early retirement. So you do have to take that into account with where we're at with renewables from a cost perspective. But yeah, definitely an interesting perspective to explore, and I'm happy to, we're happy to have that discussion outside of this conversation sometime, but for time's sake, I think we'll go ahead and move on just because we've got some more chapters to get through. So with that being said, I am going to go ahead and get started. My chapter was short and sweet. It was Buildings Designed for Life, authored by Amanda Sturgeon, who is a world famous architect from Australia. So she had previously written a book about biophilic buildings, which she touched upon in this chapter. So just to give you some context, I was interested in this chapter because I have a background in energy efficiency. So, I have seen a lot of these trends emerge over time in buildings becoming, smarter and more efficient, more thoughtful and intentional in their design. So that really excited me to hear more from Amanda on this topic. A quick overview of the chapter. Amanda starts by talking about, where we're at with buildings today. And she kind of points out the disconnect people feel when in the built environment, and noticing how disconnected we feel from the outdoors, even though studies have shown that we're much more calm, we're more productive, we're more at peace when we're in outdoor environments, and it can actually improve our memory and accomplish a lot of things that would be beneficial for us to experience when we're inside. So I thought that was a unique perspective. I know personally, I've been unmotivated when I'm indoors too long. And I think with the pandemic in full swing, that's at the forefront of my mind now more than ever. And just as it gets colder and I have less access to the outdoors, it's really upsetting. And, you know, I live in this old home that certainly didn't incorporate these design principles. And so I think it's just really important to be mindful of that as we look to the future of building design. And yeah, Amanda talks specifically about what is called biophilic design, meaning love of life. And so I think she is making that her focus when she builds, just so that, you know, she is not starting from scratch. She's not tearing down the land around a building. Rather, she's factoring that in, that natural landscape into the building itself to incorporate those amenities, which I think is really unique, and I definitely see being the future of design. So with that being said, I'll dive into some of these discussion questions. And I kind of touched upon this one, but has anyone given active thought to the detachment from nature when indoors? Or have you internalized this as somewhat normal? Do you enter a building and you just think, you know, that's how a building's supposed to be? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I can jump in here. I think for me, I definitely.
We have Ryan. I just unmuted him, so sorry. I'll
Ryan.
get to you right after. Go ahead, Ryan.
Sure. Sorry to interrupt, Paige. This kind of like spaces that question out a little bit. I read a really good article. I can't remember who it was by, but it was written by a journalist on Los Angeles about finding nature in the city, and the separation between nature in a really well-preserved place and in the city. And that question makes me think about like indoors versus outdoors. There definitely is that separation, but I think that separation also goes to, you know, when you're living in a city, especially a city like Los Angeles, and then maybe a much more rural, natural place, that there is that separation, and that it's important to find those natural aspects in a more urban place. So I think that detachment definitely is there, especially with our built environment, but it's important to, you know, take the time and look and see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason I had added that question was just because, you know, I think instinctively we all just walk into an office building and we think, oh, this is just what it is. And, you know, people have just considered that normal, as where I think if, you know, we're examining things through a different lens with this knowledge in mind, we can maybe note that, you know, maybe this wasn't best suited to incorporate this landscape into this space. Maybe there were better ways to design that building, and with that in mind, we can you know, push for that in the future, just to make us more in tune with our natural environment. I'll let Paige speak now since I cut her off earlier.
I was just going to mention that I think when we start to incorporate some of these elements of design into our buildings, we find that they're a lot more comfortable and that they're a lot more inviting spaces that we want to spend time in. So I see this as a pretty important thing to be incorporating right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll move on to the next question. Actually, I see Gail's got her hand up, so I'll give her a chance to speak. Go ahead, Gail. You're muted.
I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Well, I had something to add about fracking. I'll save till the end, but in regards to like building design, I feel like, well, I had 42 years in the healthcare IT industry. And number one, the buildings don't have that many windows. And IT people are usually in the basement by the morgue, just saying. I really think that there are ways, even in Iowa, where our climate is pretty harsh, for us to build more windows or build atriums where people can go just to get away from work, take a break. And I think it would be great if there were more windows for the non-basement offices to have big windows and look out at nice places. And I think it's really important that there are views, and that, you know, we're not looking out at the wall of another building, or you know, or we only have a view of a bunch of parking lots. And that's just my 2 cents, and I know that's very doable in Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. I think historically that just wasn't a priority for builders. And so, you know, hopefully that changes going forward and we can all reap the benefits.
Well, I think also some of these buildings, the technology was like not energy efficient. And I think that's really improved now, that they could put more windows in and atriums in harsh environments and still have the insulating factor that wouldn't degrade, like that their energy consumption wouldn't just be raised up.
I agree. I know there's a lot of great technology right now, and a lot of HVAC engineering that can help account for some of those features that maybe didn't exist in the past. Yeah, so thanks, Gail. I'm going to move on to the next question, and then we'll stop there just so we can move on. But I wanted to ask, do you guys think that Iowa's climate extremes pose a challenge for the biophilic design principles talked about here? I know a lot of the chapter had mentioned utilizing, you know, airflow and things like that during times of the year. I think it was specifically mentioned that there's technology now that allows for natural airflow to heat and cool buildings sufficiently until it's about 45 degrees. But obviously we live in a state where we experience really, really cold temperatures as well as really hot and humid temperatures. So with that in mind, do you guys see that being an obstacle for this, or in what ways can we incorporate those design principles with our unique environment in mind? Any takers?
I hate to dominate this conversation, but I just totally feel like the technology is there. And I don't even know if I agree that, it, you know, 45 degrees, it's not feasible. But I like the idea of natural airflow, definitely, because there's VOCs in especially the older buildings. They don't have really good airflow or any fresh air mixed in. But I don't think it's an obstacle. I think it's, to be honest, I think it's just the mindset of the people who design buildings and the people who, like, we're just used to it. And nobody is mentioning it like to employers that, you know, you'd really like to see that.
Yeah, definitely. I think technology has come a long way and sometimes it's cost prohibitive, but I think as it becomes more and more utilized, that it'll be more available for folks. So I'm going to let Deborah speak to that. I see her hand up.
Okay, I read an article that said that private homes are really very energy leaking or energy, they're unsustainable. And I know that they say people have very low, who live in New York City and high rises have very, very low carbon footprints. But we in the Midwest, and particularly after World War II, have made it an ideal to have our own private homes. But can you talk about the kinds of cooperatives and other building possibilities that would let people leave less carbon footprint, but still have a high quality of life. I know I went to one cooperative in Cambridge, Massachusetts that was absolutely lovely, having people live there and have sort of a small kitchen in each unit, but having a large kitchen and piano and everything on the ground floor that people could use when they wanted to have company or something. But there's lots of ways that people to do it without having each person live in their own private house.
I think that's a really a good example, Deborah, an interesting example as well. And, going back to Gail's point as well, these opportunities and these ideas exist. I think, builders and designers need to move in that direction, but, there needs to also be demand from consumers. We need to work on growing that as well.
Yeah, I think that's, having your own home and, living in such a grand space is kind of an American ideal. I know a lot of other countries, it's more normal to live in smaller spaces with shared walls. And, I think if we're wanting to pivot to that, it's going to take some social change and some, redefining of norms a little bit. Go ahead, Deborah.
But all of this is going to require social change and redefining of norms. I mean, that's a hard one, and the cars are a hard one, and the houses are. But there's going to be a lot of adjustment, and I think that's the education of how for people who've experienced this in some other countries know that it's possible to have a good quality of life without being quite as taking up as much space and energy. But it will take a lot of education.
Yeah, I think to an extent that shift is already taking place. I know a lot of older generations, not to put blame on anyone, but I think there were generations ahead of me anyway that really valued having a large home, and they built these grand homes, and now they're having a hard time selling them because buyers don't want all that space, they don't want all that maintenance, they don't want the energy costs. So I do think that shift is already occurring to an extent. But yeah, definitely an interesting point and something to look out for. But anyhow, we're going to move ahead to the next chapter since we're coming close to the end of the hour. Go ahead, Paige.
Thanks, Kristen. So yeah, I chose the chapter Public Service for Public Health by Gina Mccarthy. And Gina has a background working for the Environmental Protection Agency during Obama's administration, and more recently working for the National Resources Defense Council, where she has been fighting the environmental regulatory rollbacks that have been occurring. And while she has a broad experience working in environmental sciences, one point that she makes clear to emphasize is that this work is not enough, and that only a movement is able to create the breadth of action we need to confront the crisis. And this is because of the way that our government works, our democracy works, and that choosing to be fooled into thinking that there is some sort of easy solution is never going to work. And historically, it's always been mass movements that have created change, especially regarding the environment. And so she makes a point to say that instead of focusing on what the government is able to do to solve the problem, we must start recognizing the critical role that we all play in making the government do its job. And this leads me to my first discussion question. which is, in what ways can we as members of the community ensure that our government does its job? Thanks.
Yeah, so that's where I think people interested in these topics and wanting to be educated on them come into play. I think we need to recognize the power of our collective voices and put pressure on our elected officials to make this a priority. The more they hear from us, the more they're going to have to listen. So, I know there's a million items out there right now. I'm sure your emails are flooded with action alerts and things like that. I know mine is, but I think it's just important to remember that those actions have outcomes. And we're in a space where we have been pushing the city of Des Moines, where our team lives, to adopt a 24/7 carbon-free resolution. And just from that experience, we've seen firsthand the impact that small actions and constant pressure can put on elected officials. And it's something they can't ignore. So I think people just need to realize the power of their voice and feel emboldened to use it. Anyone else?
Yeah, I also want to chime in and stress the importance and the role that social media plays in this day and age. How people, are always online, and that's where they get their news, that's where they get their action alerts, that's where they share and kind of consume news in general. So I feel like, as communities get together, we need to also use those platforms to share our, the advocacy work that we do, and how just a simple retweet can go a long way, and how, our government, our elected officials are also being put in the spotlight, and that adds more pressure, as what Kristen mentioned. So I feel like really kind of utilizing the social media for things like this.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we've all seen firsthand the power of those tools and the power that, every individual's voice can have in creating change. And that kind of leads me into the next question, which is, she spent a lot of this chapter discussing about using health as a way to relate environmental issues to people, because it makes it more personal and it gives us an actionable way to measure success. And if we are using this to consider the problems that, face us here in Iowa, and the things that we can look forward to finding solutions for, what consequences do you see of this in Iowa? How has climate change impacted public health? And how would you hope this changes for future generations?
I think one of the biggest health impacts is asthma cases. You hear that quite a bit, and it's more pronounced, obviously, the closer you get to a polluting facility. There's some examples of other states where you have these facilities located right in residential neighborhoods, and you have clusters of illness. Fortunately, there are some communities where there is impact. Muscatine, I would be one of those where you do see industrial pollution and fossil fuel pollution in one place, but the public health impacts are certainly there for breathing, air quality, but you also think about the warming Earth in general. Heat is one of those things that will affect people. We just talked about our buildings and those spaces. If the temperatures continue to rise, what does that mean for inefficient homes and businesses? It doesn't only mean higher costs, it means less comfortable living. It means more people who are suffering through their summers, and that can particularly affect the elderly. So Those are real impacts from our choices on fossil fuels.
Yeah, I saw Ryan's hand go up. I'm gonna give him the floor.
I really like this question because I had a really great opportunity to speak with one of the lawyers who worked on the lawsuit between Des Moines Waterworks and 3 northern counties. And I think reframing climate change as a public health crisis, because it is a great way to address these things. Because I'm sure many of you know this, but Des Moines Waterworks has the largest denitrification facility in the world. And several million taxpayer dollars go into removing agricultural pollutants from our drinking water every year. And, that's in addition to just the abysmal water quality that we have. I would never find myself swimming in any of our local waters just because I know full well how dangerous they are. And I don't think that's something that very many people realize. So, like Paige was saying, a mass movement to shift climate change from being a political issue to being a public health issue, I think is really important. Talking about asthma and environmental justice communities, and especially where we are in Iowa with such horrible water quality, it's a really important thing to do. So I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree on all those issues. There's a broad range of things. We do have 2 more hands raised, but we can also move on to Jordan's chapter quickly.
I'll give the floor to Kay just because we haven't heard from her yet, and then we'll move on to the next question if that's okay.
Well, I'll just quickly say that flooding in Iowa is a public health measure. When floodwaters come in, they can bring all kinds of debris and health hazards, and flooding has become just a major issue with us. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to pass it to Jordan right here.
That sounds good. Well, I'm going to try to go through this quickly, which is going to be hard for me to do because I enjoyed this chapter so much. The author of A Field Guide for Transformation is Leah Stokes. She is a professor at the University of California and certainly a rising voice in the climate movement for her perspective about the influence of fossil fuels and utilities in shaping policy. She recently authored a book called Short Circuiting Policy about a number of different states where influence on our political systems has stymied clean energy growth. The state of Ohio, for example, that she writes about, their Speaker of the House was recently indicted for taking bribes to support legislation that would undercut renewables. So she thinks a lot about the energy industries and their impact on the climate. Well, this chapter, it starts with a personal focus for her. She really puts into perspective the personal impact that we have on our changing climate. And she talks about being in elementary school, her first taste of activism, making a t-shirt against clear cutting of the Amazon. She talks about recruiting her friends to recycle milk cartons, talking to the local grocery store about not carrying Chilean sea bass because of the fishing impacts. In college, she helped install a solar array on campus, and the excess generation helped provide for scholarships for students in need. So, activism got her start in these issues, but as she became a researcher of these topics, she found that it's easy to get lost in the small decisions and things like, am I using a plastic straw? Am I turning off the lights on and off when I'm not in the room? But, those things matter, but they matter a lot less than the choices we can't make. And that's really the energy that we're being provided in society is just beyond our reach. And it pales in comparison to what we can do personally. She says that we're not all equally to blame for the climate crisis. Though it's going to take everybody to get out of it, not all of us put us into the situation. She names, a few different examples: flight shaming, so people taking airplane flights and feeling bad about the carbon emissions from that. But she says our carbon calculators, if we're trying to find our own individual footprint, they don't account for steel in our buildings. They don't account for the fossil fuels that takes to generate our fertilizer for our crops. And they don't account for the military. We all pay taxes, and the government and the military are huge users of fossil fuels. She quotes climate advocate Bill McKibben, who says, changing the system, not perfecting our own lives, is the point. She encourages us to pay attention to our individual actions, but know that that alone will not make headway. We need to organize in collective efforts to advance carbon cutting and the transition to renewables. If you want to change the energy system, be smart about it, learn about it, better understand it, and then translate that to others and grow the circle of people you communicate with. She encourages us all to get involved with organizations that are moving the needle, and to grow your circle of friends, family who are working on these issues. I'll just close. We'll jump quickly at questions. I just want to read the last few sentences of her chapter, because I think it's pretty impactful. She says, when I come to the end of my life, I want the scales to show that I prevented more carbon emissions than I caused. And there's no way to make that happen if I only work by myself. My offset plan is activism. I know we're running short on some time here, but I'll start with the first question, because even though she talks about how it doesn't always move the needle to do these small individual actions, I think what brought you into caring about the climate and caring about the environment is important, and that should be the inspiration that carries you on to do bigger and better things with a wider circle of people. So maybe I'll open it up for questions on the first question. What was your first environmental action or moment of advocacy?
Well, I can take a quick stab at it. I think my eyes were opened in an AP environmental science course that I took in high school. And once I had this information, there was just no going back for me. And I find it really unfortunate that, that same course was on the chopping block shortly thereafter. It was not being, they were thinking about axing it from the AP offerings. And that was just heartbreaking for me to hear, because if I hadn't had that introduction at that time, I just, probably wouldn't be where I am today and have the type of enlightenment that I feel like it brought to me. So, that caused me to pursue an environmental degree in college, where I then became more active in advocacy, but that was a really pivotal moment for me personally.
Any of our attendees, I'd like to hear a little bit about how you got started caring about these issues.
For me, I am going to be 67 in December, and I'm Gail, by the way. And back then, I got involved because that was the beginning of the Earth Day movement. And it was also a big thing to start recycling and repurposing and reusing and all that. And so I got involved with Earth Day first at 18. And then I became a massive recycler. I still am today. It's exciting that I don't have to get the labels off or crush cans. But that's what I got active doing because of Earth Day. I also got very active with the Arbor Lodge group with planting of trees. And I've really just continued with that. But honestly, Al Gore's book and Greta Thunberg, her activism, I think I'm stronger than I've ever been. And I have actually done a march when I lived in Asheville, North Carolina, just a couple years ago. And, marching on the federal building in downtown Asheville to just raise awareness with our senators. And it really hasn't paid off. And it's crazy to me with what we're going through, especially with the loss of jobs in coal and steel and these other jobs. I don't understand why people don't see that doing these things would provide a ton of jobs, a ton. And even in Iowa, even in coal country, it wouldn't be hard to do one of these more. I think the big thing with nuclear is that people hear the word and it freaks them out because there have been accidents. And then the other thing is, what do we do with the used rods and plutonium that has to be buried in crazy places? And, I do think the new technologies, nuclear doesn't have as much waste. So I'm excited about that in Iowa. And I'm excited that Iowa is a leader in wind energy.
Great. Well, I know that we're past our time here. So unless somebody's jumping up and down to answer their first question, I'll let Kristen wrap us up. But use what inspired you when you first started caring about these issues. But know that there's issues that are bigger than what you can do on the individual basis. Engage everyone you know, get involved with organizations doing this work, and we can do it together.
Yeah, Jordan, I think that's a great message to wrap on here. I will just take us through the rest of the slides really, really quickly. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, but we just wanted to mention before letting you guys go that we do have a holiday gift shop open right now. So if you were inspired by the book and hoping to procure another copy, we do have those available for a donation of $35 or greater to IEC. So that's a fantastic way to support us while getting the book. And we have some other great items available there too. So Rayhan is going to send that out in the chat right before we take off here. Next up, I wanted to just put on everyone's radar that coming up in 2021, we're going to be offering some unique networking events titled our Clean Power Hour series. So we'll be hosting a happy hour of sorts to engage in some communities that we maybe haven't been as present in Iowa, taking advantage of some virtual opportunities. And we're hoping to do some networking there and to provide folks with updates on legislative priorities and items during the winter months. So be looking forward to those. We just want to thank everyone so much for spending their lunch hour with us. I will be in touch with a follow-up survey so you guys can let us know what you might like to see in future events, but we really, really, really appreciate your time. And it was great conversation. So looking forward to the next one. Take care all.